name is Jeff Miller. He's taller than I am. And he's been doing a whole bunch of stuff on his home and helping others do the same and to kick the gas habit. Also done a lot with electric cars and promoting that. And he's going to tell you more about his background, but we are delighted to have him finally come and do a presentation for us. So please give him a warm welcome.
I can put this on my shirt without breaking anything. All right. Audio all right? Probably okay. Okay, good enough. Okay, so basically, yeah, I'm a certified aircraft mechanic. That's what I went to school for a long time ago. I worked in aviation for a long time. I moved around the industries and various things, but purchasing, procurement, all sorts of different areas. I work in IT these days. And but I decided that I can only do so much as just a guy who helps people. And so I started my own little thing to do a little more, be a little more active, install stuff myself. What I'm sort of in the middle of trying to figure out what it is I actually want to do with that. Like, do I actually want to do more physical installs, more physical work? I don't mind doing some of that. I install a lot of charging stations. So I install a lot of Honda and Hyundai charging stations. I'm signed up with the company who administers those programs. So I do those Honda and Hyundai programs, but you know, I do one a weekend or something like that. So that keeps me a little bit busy. And then I'll do my own crazy stuff. But so like I'm installing my own heat pump still. It's been a warm week and I haven't had air conditioning in my house the last week or so. It's been a little bit contentious. Yeah. Unlike you, I have the equipment sitting in my backyard. So, you know, I get up to all sorts of stuff, but you know, I try to learn as much as I can. I try to expand upon that. So recently, for example, 2 weeks ago, I took a HERS rater for home efficiency to learn about how to model houses, be it new construction or existing. And, you know, you load all of the details of the house. I mean, we're talking like really exacting details to calculate the energy usage. I mean, including like all the appliances and everything. So you can estimate, this is really, it's designed for both new construction and for existing construction. So you can estimate its current usage or forecasted usage of its new house. And then, you know, start doing modifications to the model to see how it changes as you do those modifications. So if you add insulation or you change the air sealing to improve the air leakage and stuff like that, you can model that all out. I have a blower door, duct blaster, all that kind of stuff to do those sort of leakage and infiltration testing. I have all that equipment also. So I get into a lot of different things. So that's sort of, I measured my air conditioning, my old air conditioning system before I decommissioned it. I measured it was running at SEER 8.2. It's a SEER 13 unit from 22 years ago. It's not running very efficient. It's gone now. But, you know, just to put that in perspective, right? SEER 8 is pretty terrible. Okay, so that's a very rambling version of what I am and what I'm doing. And I see myself more as as much of a consultant as anything, like try to help people understand what they're trying to do. And that's where we're kind of go through the logic of what I do here tonight. And in that, when I look at a house, the first thing I look at is the electrical system, because we have a lot of older homes around, and a lot of those houses have limited electrical capacity. And when you start trying to figure out how to fit a full electric house into that limited capacity, it can get a little challenging. Okay, so kicking off the presentation here, why do we want to get rid of natural gas? Every once in a while, it blows up a building or something. I mean, that you guys saw the news about that bank in Ohio, probably. CO2 emissions. If you guys really watch the news, you may have seen there's an island being abandoned in Panama because the water level is rising to the point where people can no longer live there. And ultimately to save money, because these appliances that we're talking about tonight are often very efficient. So much so that even burning natural gas to create electricity and then transmit it to your house obviously is more expensive than just sending natural gas to your house. So there's an additional cost. But the good news is that these things are so efficient that you can actually make up for all that cost and then some to save yourself some money. She was talking about getting a heat pump, and she's going to get a heat pump and use her natural gas furnace to back it up. So we were talking about the economical crossover point and all that good stuff. So we'll get into that. And then ultimately, and you can directly correlate a kilowatt hour of natural gas to a kilowatt hour of electricity and do those energy comparisons. We're not going to dive into that tonight. And lastly, gas prices are unstable. So those of you who've been around and owned gas appliances back in the 2000s, you may remember these crazy times. And more recently, when Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Now, obviously, as consumers, we don't see the full force of these changes because the natural gas company hedges on our behalf to some degree. So that's why we didn't experience too much of a huge issue back then. But this was so long and pervasive that we all kind of got to experience that. I built a house back in 1997. I chose to have natural gas. And when the energy prices skyrocketed, I wish I had chose electric. And especially in Indianapolis, because they give a big discount for people with all electric houses. And so I was very sad. So you'll see we're in like $2 or so. And that's pretty normal for us, historically. One of the things we're going to see is, as we're starting to build more capacity out to export natural gas to Europe and all these other places, although Biden put on a moratorium recently, this is impossible to read. But the United States is here. This is a gas price compared to the rest of the world. Okay, so you can see there's a few places cheaper, and there are places you might expect, Iran, whatever, Turkey, places that have natural gas. But a lot of the countries of the world import natural gas from places like us and others. And so they're paying much more than we are. So as we build out more capacity to export natural gas, we're going to get exposed to more and more of these prices in the market. There's about a 15% cost to liquefy the natural gas, to put it on a liquefied tanker, to move it around the country or world. So the biggest delta is 15%. So for these countries that are paying 10 times what we're paying, eventually we're going to get exposed to that. Our market, natural gas market, will get exposed to that. Our oil market is global, right? We have enough capacity to export and import oil that our prices reflect the world price. Our natural gas prices do not. That will change over time. And it'll get, like I said, Biden put a moratorium on it, but it won't last. We all know that sooner or later the lobbyists for the energy company will get to them. Okay, heat pumps. What are they? This is a pretty common question. Some people may already know the answer. It's an air conditioner, more or less, but at a higher level, or more detailed level, I should say. You're using a compressor to compress, let's just say Freon for fun. It's not Freon anymore, but let's say Freon. You compress that Freon to drive up its pressure and temperature, right? Pressure and temperature go up. You send it through a coil. It's got a big fan blowing air over it. It cools it down. And as it cools down, it liquefies. It condenses into a liquid, just like your water on the outside of your cold glass, especially right now. And then, especially in my house. And then that flows into your house through the liquid line and goes through your air conditioning coil to evaporate again and draw that heat back out of your air. And if you're lucky, some of the water so that your glassware doesn't get wet. Now, if we take that process and say we take that hot gas off that compressor that we normally send to that outdoor coil and direct it to the indoor coil, we're dumping that heat from the compression into the house, and then we condense that into a liquid in the house, and then we pipe it outside and re-liquefy it using outside air. We re-evaporate it using outside air with the fan. So you just direct it the other direction. I know you can say it running in reverse, but that's not quite accurate. You're directing the hot gas that would normally be on the outdoor unit to the indoor unit, and vice versa. So that's basically how a heat pump works. Is that clear? Hopefully. All right, that's good. That's good. I like it. Heat pumps that you're familiar with, obviously, the AC units. AC refrigerator. These are heat pumps that you have in your house already. That they transmit heat away, right? Where you're taking heat from a box, be your house or refrigerator, and dumping it somewhere else. And then you've got a heat pump and heating mode where you're taking the heat from the outside and pulling it in. Dehumidifiers are a common example of something that's a heat pump, but it's not being used in a way you're probably, when you think about it, it makes sense. It's taking the air stream and flowing it over the coil that gets cold to extract the water, and then it flows over the coil that gets hot to cool the refrigerant back down, or cool the refrigerant back down so it can do it again. And then it dumps warmer air into your house that's drier. And while we're talking about dehumidifiers, we'll talk about heat pump dryers. So you can get a dryer or even a combo unit that does both washing and drying. These are extremely common in most of the world where they have less space to have two physical units. They just have one physical unit that does everything. And it's just basically a dehumidifier that dehumidifies your clothes. Instead of drying your clothes with natural gas or electricity, like a resistance, and then dumping that air and moisture outside, it dehumidifies your clothes and dumps the water down the drain. So that's how those work, and they are incredibly efficient. In fact, when I looked at a combo unit for my house, this was 5 years ago. The combo unit to run a full cycle, wash and dry, was less energy than it took to run my current washing machine. The washing machine I bought at that time because my wife wasn't ready for this. She was not ready to commit to quite that level of environmental friendliness. But if you are motivated enough, these things will. And the thing is, you throw the stuff in, you wash it, it dries it. One of the things about those systems is their wash limit is higher than their dry limit, right? You think about your washer versus your dryer. Your washer's this big and your dryer's this big, kind of situation. So when you get into these things, you've got to realize that I can't stuff it like I would stuff a washing machine. I have to pack it like I pack a dryer, which actually brings an interesting point. If you still have your dryer, there is an argument to say, well, maybe I just keep my old dryer, put one of these things in, and that way if I do something silly, like wash way too many clothes, or wash something large that won't dry in there, I can dry it in my old dryer. And then you just need it occasionally. If it's a gas dryer and you want to get rid of gas completely, well, but in the meantime, maybe that's a good solution. And certainly as you're getting used to the new equipment, or if you're like me, you have teenagers who live at home still, eventually they'll move out, maybe. And then I'll need the big dryer less. Okay. So that's kind of those, some technology things. Heat pumps also exist for like pools. You guys were asking me about pools earlier. You can get a heat pump to run your pool, heat pump water heaters to heat your water in your house. And these things, because they operate typically what they call coefficient of performance. So COP, you'll hear that term. I won't use that term too much tonight, I hope. But coefficient of performance is kilowatt hours in, like through your meter, versus heat generated. So coefficient of performance of 3 to 4 is pretty common in heat pumps. Heat pump water heaters, typically 3 to 4. So for every kilowatt hour you get through your meter, you're getting 4 kilowatt hours of hot water, or 3 kilowatt hours of hot water. And again, we can convert that to BTU if you're so inclined. We're not going to go into that tonight, but you get the idea, I think, hopefully. So, and that's true, like I said, the same things applies for all these different devices. Okay, so if we're going to kick gas, we need a lot of power, right? We need some power to deal with that. We need to, because you're going to take all these gas appliances and hopefully gas cars, and you're going to get rid of all that stuff, and you're going to start plugging all this stuff in. And the question is, well, how much power does that take? And it can be substantial when you start running the numbers. So if you have 100 amp service at your house, you have 24 kilowatts to play with. And then you double it each time you double the power, double your amperage, right? So 24, 48, 96. So I have 96 kilowatts, or what ComEd calls class 320. So I have a substantial amount of power available. That didn't happen by default. That was me. Well, technically I paid a company to do that because I wanted it done in a day instead of a week or two. So because I didn't want to be without power for 2 weeks. Who would have thought? So I've upgraded my house to ComEd class 320. It costs a few $1,000s. This is a few years ago. And I got away with, because it was a few years ago, the rules weren't quite as strict as they are now. So ComEd didn't care about wire size and stuff. But anyway, am I in your way? So yeah, if you don't know how to check this, somewhere on your breaker box is the main breaker. It usually be labeled. Sometimes it's by itself at the top, like this big. Sometimes it's a little smaller, and sometimes it's in with all the other breakers. But it may have a label next to it that says main or something like that. It'll typically be on the top left or the bottom right, if it's clumped with everything else. But it'll be 100 amp, or if it's clumped with everything, it'll typically be 100. If it's up by itself, it could be 200 or more. Any questions on that? I know that's a very specific. Okay. So now we know, now if you know what that number is, you can multiply it times 240 and you get that total capacity. Now what? We need to know how much we already have allocated in your house, right? So, and I mentioned this earlier, but yeah, 4,000 is, I paid about 4,000, 3,000 in labor and $1,000 in hardware. Okay, so, and we can manage that allocation, right? We can actually deal with that allocated power, and we can do stuff. You can do stuff by getting radically more efficient in certain ways, be it more insulation, or there's all sorts of different ways to become more efficient, right? To different appliances, so on and so forth. Okay, we're going to get a little technical for a minute, and I apologize. Yeah, so so basically, I'm just going to the people who want to read, they can read. I'm going to summarize a bit here. If you have I'm just going to kind of refer to a standard 1,500 square foot home. There's not such a thing as a standard home, but we're going to use 1,500 square feet for my fun tonight. The 1,500 square foot home with standard kitchen outlets and appliances, is the required by code typical, or required by code and or typical, is about 21.25 amps or 5,100 watts. Okay. Once you add in all the other stuff that a lot of houses have, garbage disposal, ceiling fans, sump pumps, microwaves, all that stuff, if it's physically installed, we have to account for it. Garbage disposals, it's physically installed and mounted to the house, we have to account for it. And that ends up, well, we're going to say about 40 amps or about 10,000 watts, give or take. Right, that's pretty typical. I do a lot of load calculations as I look at charging stations, because you have to do a load calculation to know if you have room for a charging station or not, and what you're going to do with that. Okay, so these are the common stuff that most people have, right? I mean, most people don't have a pool heater, but some people do. And there are heat pump models for them. So these are kind of what they're, heating is variable. It's a huge range from, just a couple of mini splits. If you can make your house run in a couple of mini splits and be happy. I know people who do that. They've got a little bit smaller house. They insulate the living out of it, and now they only run on, 40 or 30 amps of heating and cooling with just running very efficient mini splits that only take 5 or 10 amps each. Extremely efficient if you can get your house into that situation and you don't mind wall or ceiling mounted units. You can be very efficient, like really efficient. So it's a heat pump system, but instead of being mounted on ductwork and all that, you mount it on the wall. Again, European style of heating and cooling. Each room has its own, or each section of the house has its own, that sort of thing. They're called mini splits. I apologize.
Is that like what you see in a hotel room sometimes?
The hotel rooms are typically down low, yeah. And those are depends on the system, but they're usually like right on the other side of the wall. Yeah. Where a mini split will actually be, the outdoor unit will be far separated from the indoor unit. Good question, by the way. Okay, stove. Most people have a stove. If you run an induction stove or a regular stove, I have an induction stove. I got rid of my gas stove. I've got an induction stove now. They all tend to be around 8 kilowatts. If you have a separate range and a separate oven, now you're talking about, who knows, 10, 12. It can get much worse. Because you have an oven that's 6 and a stove or a range that's 8 or 10 or whatever. Water heater. Electric water heater is typically a 30 amp circuit, around 6 kilowatts. But you can get heat pump water heaters that we talked about. There's different kinds. There's ones that have the heat pump that runs for most of the load, and then they have a resistance element to back it up. If you need a lot of water fast, you have guests, and you're starting to really run through it. It'll kick those things on. But a lot of people, they even make ones that don't have that, so you can just plug it into a standard 110 outlet and just use very little power. So, but the recovery time is a little slower. But yes,
are these the kilowatt hours for the electric?
Yeah, these are the kilowatt, not kilowatt hours, but just straight kilowatts for the electric units.
For the electric, and how does that compare to the gas?
Well, I mean, you can do actual math, but we're just assuming that the gas ones are going away. But because the gas
is equivalent, this same amount of.
Well, the thing is like an induction stove doesn't need anywhere near the energy of a gas stove, because the gas stove's dumping all that heat into the atmosphere, and so it's not really a direct comparison. But this is what they actually draw.
If you were to convert the BTUs that you generate with gas.
Yeah.
Because the energy injection into the item that you're trying to heat is significantly more efficient.
Yeah, it depends.
Except for maybe the oven.
The clothes dryer, maybe not. But anyway, it depends, right?
No, the clothes dryer is significantly more efficient.
If you use a heat pump one.
Fitless one, then you're not dumping the heat outside.
Exactly, and you're condensing it back. Yeah, and your dehumidified air. So each of these items, they vary, right? Everything here, your electric car charging station, versus gasoline. Well, if you start talking about the car, it's much more efficient. But anyway, talking about how it converts is probably not the greatest thing, but this is relevant for the next step, which is just giving you an overview of clothes dryers, about 5 kilowatts, unless you go for a unit that just plugs into 110 outlet and it only draws, 1 kilowatt or so. So again, there's ways to toy with this, right? It can be 5 kilowatts, or it can be 1. And it can be 6 kilowatts, or it can be 1, right? There's these ways that you can tweak this. But this is these are the standard numbers that you typically would see if you buy the standard equipment. If you go and buy a standard clothes dryer that just plugs into a big honking outlet on a 30 amp circuit that just doesn't have a heat pump or whatever, it's 5 kilowatts or maybe even more, right? It's typical water heater, just standard electric resistance water heater. 6 kilowatts is pretty standard. So those are the, and again, these things are just, again, normal numbers. They vary. You can have more, but yeah. All right. And then heating, of course, like I said, it can be very drastic. Then we'll cover that a little bit more later. Okay. So we're going to talk about a simple home. We're going to go back to our 1,500 square foot house. And like I said earlier, we have about 10 kilowatts of stuff from floor space and all that calculation, which again, I'm not going to go into in high detail, but 5 kilowatt for a clothes dryer, if you have a standard clothes dryer, 6 kilowatt for a water heater, 8 kilowatts for a stove, heat pump, 6 kilowatts. And then and that brings you up to 35 kilowatts, which is 145 amps. So if you have 100 amp service, you'll say this route will not work for you. If you have, this is a fully electrified house, okay? So this is what it takes for a fully electrified house, except for heating. And so like what she did, she's doing a heat pump with a gas backup. And so this gets you to that point. So if you have a 200 amp service, you can get all of that done on 200 amp service, and you have a reasonable amount of power left over for do a car charge or something like that, but you still have gas service. But if you go full electric like I'm doing on mine, now all of a sudden you've got an electric resistance heat to help keep your house warm, potentially, right? Depending on your furnace setup, what you've done, mini splits versus electric and resistance heat and stuff like that. I mean, in theory, you could do baseboard heaters. There's all sorts of different things you can do. Okay. And it really comes down to your specific house. But you'll say if we throw in a 20 kilowatt resistance heater, and that's pretty common, a lot of people will throw in a 20 kilowatt resistance heater because it should cover the vast majority of the houses. It brings you up to 200 amps. So yes, you can do it with a 200 amp service. You can fully electrify your house without getting crazy high tech, with using all appliances that are common. You could probably walk into a used appliance store and get the vast majority of this stuff for a few $1,000s. So, if you wanted to go that route, that is possible. But that's it's not the most efficient, but it'll get the job done. And this is what you see in standard electric houses around the country, right? Not every area has natural gas, right? In some places it's outlawed. They're talking about doing that in Chicago, if I remember right. So, and places in California have done it, places in New York have done it. So so if you're wondering how do people live without natural gas, this is how. Standard stuff. We've been doing this electric house thing for, I don't know, 100 years. I have no idea. A long time.
You've been getting more efficient equipment.
You can, yeah, absolutely. This is basically just a straight up or resistance stuff. Nothing special, nothing efficient. This is just, the bog standard stuff that everybody has in, rural Indiana or whatever. Then you add a car, right? So we're already getting up towards 200 amps if you went full electric. You add a car, well, how do I deal with that capacity? There's a couple things we can do, but I think most everyone here has probably upgraded to LED lights by this time. I know for my house, I had just over 100 light bulbs in my house when I moved in. 100. And they were mostly 100-watt light bulbs, and I got rid of all of them. Took a while, but I got rid of them all. And with LED lighting, that's 10 kilowatts of lighting load by itself. So I got rid of all that lighting and heating and put in, heating, and put in LED light bulbs, knocked down to 1 kilowatt. So the 3 watts per square foot, that's part of the calculation earlier. As you get more efficient, that becomes less of a problem. So one of the stations I install fairly frequently is called, the brand name is Emporia, and they have a energy monitoring system that ties into your breaker panel, and it monitors the circuits. But as it watches the mains, it can communicate with the car charging station, and it can turn the power down on the car charging station as your demand goes up. So if your house demand starts rising, it'll automatically dial the power back down on the car. I've also done this in like a sub panel in the garage situation. So if you have like a garage sub panel, but it's got a bunch of stuff on it, but it doesn't usually on, put one of those on the garage sub panel, put the charging station in the garage, and then it watches that garage sub panel to make sure it doesn't exceed its capacity. If you go out there and fire up the air compressor and whatever else you have in your garage, lighting, heating, whatever, like Mark's big electric heater he's got.
That's a question for you.
Sir.
So if
You can put it on there to monitor utilization to dynamically adjust the charging of the car.
Yeah,
Are there,
absolutely.
like survey ones you can just like put on there to see what you're currently at.
Yeah, it'll also do, well, the same unit will actually do all that stuff.
Yeah.
It'll tell you and if you have all the circuits monitored, it'll tell you what all the circuits are doing. And
Is there like a thing at like Menards you can buy to test to see where you're at?
oh, a clamp on amp meter.
Oh,
Yeah. I've got a half a dozen of them or whatever. But yeah, you clamp it on. It's a clamp on amp meter. They're usually $100 or more depending on which one you go for. But yeah, that's for the problem is getting the house up to the point where that tells you something. So if you run around and turn everything on and make sure like oven's preheating or broiling or all the different things and make sure literally everything's running at max and then go clamp on and measure each side, that's a really good way to check your balance. You should have, make sure you don't have too much skew between the two phases or two sides of the phase. But anyway, that's again, getting more technical. Okay, so we take our 1,500 square foot house and we're gonna assume for a minute it has a 100 amp service. What happens next, right? So if we want to fully electrify 100 amp, a 1,500 square foot house with 100 amp service without paying the $4,000 in service upgrade or more, depending on, I was looking at a house and his power comes in from like way across his backyard. He's got a whole ton of big, gigantic trees that it runs underneath and just, it's like, oh man, you're so toast. So heat pump washer dryer combo unit. Again, it plugs into a standard 110 wall outlet. It dumps what normally would be pumped outside, all that lovely conditioned air that you spend all that money conditioning, that would normally get heated up and then bake your clothes and then dump it outside. It doesn't do that. It recycles that air into water and dumps the water down the drain. Good news about that. And then, so you don't need to even have the outside vent. So you don't have that extra hole in your house leaking air into your house all the time. You don't have all those problems. It takes longer. It's a little bit slower. Maybe let's just say 25% slower for my friends. What my friends say, I don't have one yet. The other thing they say is that they take the clothes out of the fryer and they give them a shake because they haven't been baked in basically an oven. So there's a little bit of residual humidity. They give them a shake and they get whatever comes off them and they're happy.
It's got to make your clothes last longer too.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, probably shrink less anyway.
Question in the back?
Question in the back.
No, I can add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I switched from a 200 amp service to a 400 amp service.
Oh, good job.
And at that time, because I was increasing my use, ComEd actually charged $0.
Yeah, ComEd will charge you nothing if there's some conditions to that. But yeah, if you don't need to pull new wire, then you're good. But if your wire is not big enough, then there will be some charges, depending.
No, we put it wire.
Oh, I'm saying the wire to the street. Okay, so you put in the wire from the transformer in the house, so you paid for that wire. That wasn't free. Yeah. Yeah, it probably, that costs a few grand then. But yeah, I mean, if you're doing that and you're paying for the wire to dig and trench all the way out, that gets a little more expensive. Mine, I was lucky. The wire coming in my house, they said at the time it was big enough. I won't debate them on that fact. Under their current Red Book standards, it's not, but hey, who's arguing? It's their wire, they control it, and they decide, and then if it breaks, it's on them to fix it. Anyway, so how do we get this 100 amp service done? Combo unit, heat pump, washer, and dryer, right? Because again, it only draws about 1 kilowatt. And because it plugs into the standard, and again, I didn't cover this in great detail, but the NEC standard has the washing machine built into this. Since this is just the washing machine, it is included in your load calculation by standard. Heat pump water heater without the resistance backup heater. And if you're just, a pretty normal household, a lot of people have good success with that. Obviously the stoves, as far as I know, there's not a heat pump stove yet, regrettably. I wish there was, but still looking at 8 kilowatts for that stove. That's still a painful and expensive thing. But, again, induction and all that is great. I love induction stove, by the way.
But it's more efficient.
It's more efficient, but it still has a peak. We're looking at how it fits into your electric service, not how much energy it uses. It's two different things. The actual heat pump for the outside unit with a gas backup. Now, if you made your house way more efficient by insulating it to death or whatever, and doing a lot of air sealing, you know, this may be it. This may be all you need. You may not need the gas backup anymore, right? There's ways to get there that way too. And I'll probably mention more about that later. You know, the usual 10 kilowatts of standard stuff, a car charger with load monitoring, like we're talking about. I haven't spelled that right. So you know, you don't have, so when your stove's not running, you have 8 kilowatts of capacity to run your car charger, basically, if you want to think of it that simply. And really, 8 kilowatt stoves very rarely pull 8 kilowatts. You still have gas in this situation, but your cutover temperature depends on the equipment you install. But your cutover temperature is going to be, let's just say for fun, 40 degrees or 30 degrees. So below 30 degrees or 40 degrees, you're running natural gas. Above that, you're running heat pump. And it could be a lot lower than that, depending on your system. And you're going to have much lower utility bills overall. Like, this is going to do fantastic things for your electric bill. And, you know, we talk about this equipment, but the reality is this stuff isn't that expensive. If you're going to replace your washer and dryer anyway, this combo unit costs only a little bit more than a pair, right? A washer and dryer pair. I mean, it's more expensive for a single unit. So if you wanted 2 of them to double your capacity, but anyway, which would be something I would do, then, you know, it'd be a little more money, but it's not drastic. And remember, a lot of things get tax credits and stuff like that. So you get paid in a lot of cases to do this stuff. So this is how you can get there. Like I said, and depending on how your house is set up, you may be able to get rid of that gas backup and drop it with just the 100 amp service. It's possible, but it's going to take some effort on the installation front. All right. Whoops, I went too far. Okay, yeah. Did I get the, make sure I did. Yeah, okay. Now, for fun, like I was talking about earlier with your LED light bulbs and all that good stuff, which I love them, by the way. And I also love the fact that I don't have to change them. I installed like 100 light bulbs around my house. I think I've changed maybe 12 of them. And it's been 9 years or something like that, or 8 or 9 years. That's fantastic. Like, if I was an incandescent bulb, I would change 200 light bulbs by now. That's a fantastic thing. I love that. So, okay. Now, yeah, and National Electric Code recognizes this method. Not every town is going to have the easiest time with it. I know Crystal Lake, at least last time I did this with Crystal Lake, they weren't too picky. I showed them what I was doing, and showed them the monitoring measurements and everything, and they were like, okay. So it comes down to the who's doing what. But you can measure your peak load, and if you have like I said, the Emporia actually shows you the peak load. It just shows you right on the screen. Oh, there it is. So you don't have to like dig through the data and try to figure it out. It just shows you the information. So you know the peak load. You can go to the utility, or not the utility, with your permit, you can submit that and say, hey, my peak load is this, and then I can use the rest. Let's just say your peak load is 60 amps on her 100 amp service. That's 40 amps. And you can use 80% of that, so 32 amps. And you can say, okay, I'm going to install a 32 amp car charging station. And that's fine, right? Even though your standard load count comes up to a much larger number, if you never use it all, then you can do these things. Like I said, jurisdictional, sometimes they get a little different, just depends. But hypothetically, it's definitely in the National Electric Code, and it's a valid way to address your issues in that regard if you're trying to address these things. Okay, so we've covered kind of some of the theoretical things, a couple different theoretical houses. So what's next? Formulate a plan. All right, what appliances do you want to change next? What do you want to get an electric car if you don't already have one, right? I count that as an appliance in my world. You guys may not. It's just it gets me around. So you know, there's oldest is first, or you can look at it from highest energy use, right? Biggest user. So that would be your furnace. Just so you guys know, cars are number 1 for most people, and furnaces are number 2. Everything else is lower. You know, water heating is number 3 typically, and then down from there. So, you know, that would be one way to approach it, or just, oh, my water heater is getting ancient. Or it's leaking water. Maybe it's time to get rid of it. Yeah, so those sorts of approaches are fine. But I would do, so I always do this. I build a load calculation based on my current, whatever my current is, right? I go through and I look at my current house, whatever it is, and I build that current load calculation. So all the garbage disposals, bathroom fans, all that stuff, put it all in the load calc and see where we are. And then I make a copy, and then I start making edits, right? I start adding, okay, you want to get rid of that gas water heater and put in this. You want to get rid of the gas stove and put in that, right? We start making those adjustments, and we see when we run out of power. And then we keep going until we get to whatever the end state is you want, right? And then we see what the total is. So with that information, you know, like, okay, I know when I ran out of power, and then I know what my end result is. Now, as I talked about earlier, there's different paths here. So you can say, okay, I'm good at accepting this instead of that. The trade-off is worth it, right? And so you build that into load calculation. Maybe I do it again, right? Just to revise it and come up with a new product has come on the market. Let's see if that cleans up something and makes it better, right? Those, the real low power water heaters are a huge thing. People are loving that because they've got these low, not restricted service, and it just enables them to go to these water heaters without a service upgrade, right? And someplace in, say, Southern California, that's a huge deal. Okay, and especially with the price of their power out there. And then if there's close, there's obviously we talked about car charging stations. There's even electric panels that dynamically manage power. They're typically rather expensive. I'm hoping over time that sort of, like, the technology has been there for a long time to do it. It's not in a nice, pretty package, except for these very expensive panels. So that'll sort itself out over time. But doing electrical panel upgrades even without doing a service upgrade, still an expensive and time-consuming task. Just ask Kyle; he knows all about it. Okay, other way.
And our panel prices out about, say Levitron panel that only kit out with it as smart breakers.
And how much we talking? $3,000. So that's the trick, right? $3,000 gets really close to a service upgrade depending on your situation. So it's like, do I do the smart panel or I just do a service upgrade and not have to worry about it? Yeah. Tax credit? No, but you will on your service upgrade.
You can on the service panel as well.
Oh, can you? Okay. Okay. So the the Inflation Reduction Act will fund a portion of your service upgrade.
Is it like 5?
It's 30%. I don't remember what the limit is. Yeah. So, they'll give you some cash towards it. It's not a huge, it's.
Also in that regard, we're kind of waiting for Illinois to get the laws in place for the rebates that the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, specify.
The IEPA, our friends of the IEPA. So, we think I'll actually cover that later. Okay, so basically, if we take these improvements far enough, insulation or these really high efficiency appliances, we take that to a little further, farther along, there isn't really a need to upgrade in most cases, but you're going to have to put that investment in, right?
Just one question.
Yes, sir.
About air sealing and insulating your home. I know that's a very important thing to do, and of course, coming from Europe, where they insulated homes to the extent that mold was the order of the day, it's very important to understand that you have to have air volume changes.
Mm-hmm.
To get air volume changes in a home, it's not a simple matter of just replacing the air. It's replacing the air, but recovering the heat that you're generating in the home, or the heating that you're extracting from the home. So makeup air should be carefully addressed, but that's the important thing. But part of your insulation strategy is to make sure that you have clean air and that you have air changes.
Yeah, and make sure you're not pulling the house negative, because if you're pulling the house negative, you'll backdraft if you have any combustion appliances left, you'll backdraft them, right? You'll be pulling carbon monoxide back in. I can do that, yeah.
Verify that is not a problem.
Yeah, I can do that, yes, if that's.
Sometimes don't realize that the water heater in a small room is not the right thing to do, because there needs to be sufficient airflow to that
Well, it's
How I'd want
same thing with the furnace and all that stuff. And I can tell you the other thing is people have fireplaces, traditional fireplaces that are open and all that. It's going to get tricky, right? Because you're pulling that air through. So, all right. So next steps, decide if you want to kick gas completely. Who wants to kick gas completely? All right.
I don't like paying $20 a month just for it to be at my house.
There you go. So do you aggressively or naturally as they die out? So if your water heater's leaking water out of it and it's like, oh, it's time for it to go, that's the time to decide, hey, I want to do that heat pump water heater, right? Or you got people like Kyle who's going to rip everything out and replace it.
It takes a lot of floor space.
There is that. Okay, and then obviously we kind of alluded to this, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's plenty of money out there. ComEd has their heat pump credits and their thermostat credits. Depending on what tier you're in, it's either $1,200 or $1,400 for the heat pump. So again, I'm not going to dive into that tonight. Take too long, take forever. So look at them, but a lot of times there's limits per year, but you can have it multiple years. So a lot of times there's opportunities to spread it out over 2 or 3 years. That may make the most sense for you, both in the terms of cash out of pocket and also for tax credits, and also just as as a logical way of going about these things. And that was the Illinois EPA is eventually going to release the program, and we're understanding from CUB is that's going to be 2025. We had somebody out here presenting a couple months ago that talked about that. So we're hoping to see that, and that should help out a lot of folks. Okay. Unfortunately, a couple of these people, in fact, 2 of these people didn't make it. Nathan Roten is Birdie Air Heating and Cooling. He's a Defenders business member. And so that's cool. We always want to support our Defenders business members. He does Mitsubishi heat pumps, and I think he does a couple others. But, if you want to talk about heat pumps and all that, he's definitely a good guy to talk to. Ryan Scher, and again, he was supposed to be here. He was in my HERS-Rater class. HERS-Rater is the class to do home efficiency and all that modeling and stuff I talked about earlier. He was in the class with me, and I invited him to come out tonight, but he said he got stuck in a job in someplace. Poor guy. But anyway, he can help out. Him or myself can help figure out the insulation and all that stuff. And then Tom Coleman. Tom, please stand up. Say hi.
Hi.
There's Tom. So Tom is your president, is that right? Chairman of the Climate Reality Chicago, right?
Like Jeff was saying, it's time to replace an appliance or a car. Consider electric. That's what's called an electric pledge. ClimateReality.com. Want to learn more about it? Supports what Jeff was saying. You don't have to go out and spend all the money now, but consider it. When you need to replace something, do it with electric because it's almost always cheaper to do that. It costs a little more upfront.
And the reason why I'm giving this talk, the reason why I'm doing this is because if you're trying to do a furnace, let's just say for fun, and you didn't plan for it, you may not have the power to do it, right? And so you've got to make sure you have a plan. So along with doing the pledge, you should sit down and figure out the plan. And that may involve somebody like me helping you out, and that's fine. I'm cool. I'm good with that. And then me. Like I said, I don't exactly know what I'm doing here, but that's a whole nother story.
Is there any good sites in which you can assess one or the other in terms of heat efficiency and cost?
AHRI.org, I think it is. The AHRI directory. You can pull up every AHRI, the air RI, yeah. And AHRI, they test all this stuff. Now they tested at 47 degrees, which I think everyone will agree 47 degrees would be lovely, but it's not reality around here. So you have to do a little more digging and reading. Typically find the units you're interested in and dig into it. Now the AHRI documentation is important because that actually tells you that's the authority on what the SEER rating is for collecting all of your credits from the various people. So when you find that, you want to find that system, and it's got to be a match system typically. Your indoor unit and outdoor unit both need to be listed together, and then print that sucker out and keep it because you're going to need it when you file all your stuff to get all your money. Mr. Tom.
Yeah.
We are America. Yep, that's a good one.
For example, in my case, my gas water heater is 16 years old. I think
they only last 12 years, so I'm on borrowed time. So my wife and I are already planning the replacement. And we will probably kill it before it dies, because when it dies, a lot of times it's water.
Yes.
So that's our next thing. Then there's the clothes dryer, which is also like over-inspired.
They have a good app, I
Well, they
think,
do.
in terms of assessing what the benefits and costs and rebates are for each
That's
of these.
rewiring.com. Okay.
It might be .org.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they can talk, you know, I'm not sure.
.org.
Just.
Google Rewiring America.
Just
All
a
right.
reminder that we have done programs on the rebates before, so that's available on the Environmental Defenders of McHenry County's YouTube channel, so you can see our past program on that, and also we work with the county to do programs on this as well, so you can find the Green Drinks program, and you can also find another video on our YouTube channel that'll walk you through that. So,
All right.
Simon?
Simon?
So what I like about your presentation is that at the 100 amp panel, you're talking about evaluating what you've got. I think for the simple expediency of putting in a current monitoring system, and maybe there's a display somewhere in the house that people can see that you're leaving all the lights on, and this is a great education tool for the family. Hey, you're cooking the house.
Well, LED bulbs make that a lot better than it used to be,
Yeah.
because it used to be real bad. But yeah, LEDs.
People understand that turning on the stove and all these other appliances, and you learn to get to understand where the energy is going, and it's
Yep.
part of that journey towards energy efficiency and of course the environmental outcome by not burning gas. But they say in England, don't burn stuff.
Don't burn stuff. And I will tell you that I get alerts every time somebody leaves my oven on, because that happens all the time.
Okay, so I've got a question about gas, or I'm sorry, electric heat pump water heaters.
Sure.
Is there a break point where if the temperature gets too low outside, it's not work?
Okay. This is fun. Heat pump water heaters. There are a few models, and a very precious few, that actually use outside air. And unfortunately, in this climate, I do not recommend any of them, because they all are operating kind of in the what I refer to as the hydronic model, where they pipe the water outside, heat it up, and then pipe it inside to a storage tank. This is cool, but unfortunately, that means when the power goes out, the heater that keeps that thing warm and keeps the water from freezing stops working. And the last thing I wanted to go do when the power is out is go try to figure out how to empty the water out of my house. So the vast majority of them, all the ones that you typically see in Menards or Home Depot or whatever, Ream, A.O. Smith, etc., they all have the actual heat pump sitting on top of the water tank. It's all one integrated vertical unit. It just looks like a tall water heater, and it's got inlet and outlet, and it's just sucking air from the environment around it. Now,
So there's no outside heat?
no outside heat exchanger at all. This comes with some caveats. Caveat number one, it has to have some room to work with. If you put it in a relatively small room, that room will become a refrigerator because it's sucking the heat out of that room. Caveat number two, as it sucks heat out of a room, it also happens to do, some dehumidification, and that water is going to go somewhere. So you better make sure you have a plan for that. So yeah, those, my house, that would be fine because I have a big open basement and it could suck heat out of there and dehumidify it all day long, and I'd be happy.
One other thing that you could do, if you have solar, and you're planning on having electric solar panels, that energy that's being received from the sun could actually be used to soak up into an electric water heater.
Yeah, I mean,
Kind of energy storage.
it probably will, just because if you take showers in the morning and the sun's coming up, then you're going to heat that water back up. So yeah, absolutely.
So that brings me to my next question.
Shoot.
I have solar panels.
Cool.
I had a program through ComEd where they'll buy back my excess power, but they limited me to the number of panels I could have.
Yep. Net
I
metering.
use it.
Yep.
If I get a heat pump water heater, my usage goes up. Will I be able to add panels?
Yeah, because your usage goes up. But here's the trick. The thing is about that, if you add an electric car, add a heat pump furnace, the heat pump water heater is not going to drive it that much. They're pretty efficient, so you're not going to see that much. But you add a heat pump that runs in the wintertime for your conditioning your house, yeah, you're going to see that, right? You add a couple of cars, you're going to see that. My cars last month used more than my house because I have 4 of them, and it's a shoulder season, right? There's not a lot of demand for heating and cooling, So my car's exceeded my house usage. So, and that includes all the computers and everything else we have, which is a substantial amount.
There's no longer.
But here's the bad news. So Mike, here's the bad news. The issue you're gonna run into, you've got to hurry up because when you add more panels, you're going to change your contract, right? Because you're going to generate more. And the plan for net metering with ComEd expires at the end of the year. After the end of the year, they're not going to offer net metering anymore. And they're going to offer something else. Whatever it is, it's not true net metering like it is now.
Bills can answer.
Bill can answer. Excellent. Bill, tell us more.
No longer for the customer. It's not going to be one
Right?
an existing customer.
So, but if even under expansion. Okay, good. Thank you. That's excellent news. Good news. Oh, I'm glad we had the service line guy here.
What Bill just said.
Install a solar panel this year.
Install a solar panel this year.
One.
Install something quickly.
Yeah,
We're running out of runway.
We are running out of time. That's for sure. So Bill said that if you already have if you already have a net metering contract and you expand your array, even in the future, you can keep your net metering one-to-one net metering contract.
We have
Okay.
time for one more question.
One question.
It's certification.
What kind of
You
certification?
know, is there special people that are properly certified to give you good advice on environmentally sustainable equipment and?
Well, I'm not sure about what I would call environmentally sustainable, but if you look at it from an energy standpoint, you know, your Energy Star raters, your home efficiency raters like myself, yeah, that would be me, somebody like me. So yeah, that's why I went up.
No.
No, it's rare. There's not a lot of people who do that. Well, we're out of time, but
Heating changeover is required to get ComEd to switch you from the regular electric rate to the electric heat.
I don't know. I'll find out.
Okay.
I'll find out if I get it.
Okay.
Nope. Did I turn it off? Oh no, I think it's still on. Okay. I pushed the button.
Jeff can answer more questions after, because we ran out of time. So we need to go move on.